to the Honourable Member for Scarborough-Guildwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for this opportunity to participate in the debate. Our American friends on the weekend had a rally to restore sanity and or fear in Washington, and attracted quite a substantial crowd, Mr. Speaker. It was a sort of humorous, ironic poke at previous rallies, and at its core it was really a response to the bombastic nonsense that gets spouted by the conservative right, and with some, may I say, some assistance by the left as well, who are not not without guilt in this matter. It's the lunacy that passes for political discourse in the U.S. sometimes makes us shake our heads. And you know, it's pretty hard to take things seriously when the United States is looking at multiple trillion-dollar deficits, historically high unemployment, and absurd disparities between the uber wealthy and literally millions of people who are desperately poor. Yet listening to the high-paid media punditry is a little like watching a dialogue of the deaf. All gestures and positioning, but no hearing or listening. Yet America goes from crisis to crisis and back again. My favorite sign, Mr. Speaker, at the rally was one which said, what do we want? And the response was, reasonable discourse. And when do we want it, Mr. Speaker? Well, sometime in the not-too-distant future. And indeed, Mr. Speaker, in some respects that applies to our situation here. Canadians do tend to be a touch overly smug about our American cousins, and we do tend to sort of watch them like a train wreck in slow motion and want to scream at the televisions saying, engineers, stop this train. But really, Mr. Speaker, here we should have our own rally to restore fiscal sanity. How, Mr. Speaker, can you possibly pat yourself on the back if you take a $13 billion surplus inherited from Messrs. Martin and Chrétien and turn it into a $56 billion deficit in 3 short years, and then pat yourself on the back? How do you take an unemployment rate of something south of 6%, turn it into an unemployment rate of something north of 8%, and call yourself a fiscal manager, a good fiscal manager? How do you take spending, which by any measurement anywhere is out of control, and count yourself as a good fiscal manager? How do you take $14 billion out of a revenue stream year after year, which over 5 years is something in the order of $90 billion, jack up the debt by $156 billion, and freeze funds for the most desperately poor in the international community, and still go around patting yourself on the back? So, Mr. Speaker, that's why I think we should have our own rally here to restore fiscal sanity to our nation. But really, Mr. Speaker, the irony was that they called it a rally to restore sanity and or fear. Because, Mr. Speaker, in this nation it really is, and this government is, give fear a chance. Tap into people's fears, and they will let you do almost anything. You certainly don't have to have any political dialogue which makes any sense at all. In fact, members are so disgusted with the level of discourse in this chamber that they supported the honourable member's motion from Halton to reorganize the way in which we carry on political discourse here in this chamber. Nor do you want anything which would pass for empirical research. Hence the big fuss over the pension, Mr. Speaker, or over the census. The census is probably the bedrock of empirical data for this country. It's relied upon by literally thousands and thousands of organizations. But of course, if you don't have that bedrock of data, you therefore don't necessarily have any problems. And if you don't have any problems, you don't have to worry about them. And then you can just simply rely on your own ideology to initiate or not initiate things as you see fit. So all you then have to do is play to people's fears. The crime rate is out of control. Well, who actually knows, Mr. Speaker? There's no data to support that one way or another, because there's no census, there's no hard data, there's no objective way of deciding. Therefore, what you do is you just play on the fears. So we're going to have another crime agenda, according to the Justice Minister here in question period. Well, how would we actually know that there are crime-related issues, Mr. Speaker, if in fact there's no data to support it one way or another? So you repeat, you feed into fears, and whether it's objective nonsense or not, you keep on with the repetition of phrases like tax and spend, one of the favorite phrases around here. It's irrelevant that this government is far and away the nation's most aggressive and biggest spender literally in the history of the nation. Drum that tax and spend message home. That's what you're supposed to do. It's irrelevant that this government has burdened multiple future generations with debt. It's irrelevant that debts and deficits are merely nothing but postponed taxes. Drive that tax and spend message home, Mr. Speaker, because if you get people fearful enough and dumb enough to believe that the biggest borrow and spend government in our history fancies itself as good economic stewards. A rally, Mr. Speaker, to restore fiscal sanity is in order. Canadians are sensible people, but even sensible people can be stampeded by fear. We want to keep fear alive. It can take a healthy balance sheet inherited from Messrs. Martin and Chrétien, a sane banking system, and strong economic fundamentals, turn it upside down, and blame the very people who brought you the fiscal sanity in the first place. This government's economic credentials would do credit to a Monty Python skit. Up is down, in is out. As Jon Stewart said, we're living in hard times, we're not living in end times. Does anyone not smoking something actually believe a finance minister who says he's not going to cut transfers, not going to cut program spending, not going to cut his largest program items, and still balance the budget? And oh, by the way, we're going to offer further $6 billion in tax relief to corporations that don't need it, commit a further $35 billion to an airplane, and spend $10 to $13 billion on prisons, which we didn't really tell you about when we were passing the Truth in Sentencing Act, and until the parliamentary budget officer caught the government with their hands in the cookie jar, they only fessed up to it at the last minute. So, Madam Speaker, you put that all together, that just doesn't make a lot of sane economic rationale. A rally to restore fiscal sanity can't begin soon enough. Our nation can't afford to go the way the U.S. has, where the revenue base has been destroyed, costs are through the moon, and the country is slogging through a legacy burden that would have destroyed a lesser nation. Borrowing to cut taxes just doesn't work, Mr. Speaker. It never will work. It never has worked. Any CEO wouldn't cut back his or her revenues and then let costs get away from them. It doesn't work in a business, it doesn't work at home, and it doesn't work in government. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm hopefully starting a revolution here, Mr. Speaker, a rally to restore fiscal sanity. Tax cuts are not a religion. It is rank demagoguery to say tax and spend and all that sort of silly nonsense that gets spouted by the finance minister and the prime minister and others. You have to have conversation about what your revenue base is and what your cost base is. The government spends 15% of the nation's GDP, Mr. Speaker. You can't carry on the way you're carrying on without bequeathing to our future generations multiple $billion worth of debt, and that is no way to run a nation, and it's certainly not fiscal sanity. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.